CFL 110, your weekly trip around the biggest stories in the Canadian Football League with Jeff Hamilton and Andrew Hustler Paterson.
What is going on, CFL fans? Welcome to a Winnipeg Sports Talk and our weekly edition of CFL 110. Andrew Paterson, about to be joined by Jeff Hamilton of the Winnipeg Free Press. This is a little bit of a different show today. Obviously, a watershed moment for the Canadian Football League yesterday with the new commissioner, Stuart Johnson, announcing a number of significant changes for the Canadian Football League moving forward into the 26 and 27 seasons. We did joke that the Bombers' win after completing only 3 passes forced the commissioner to act immediately. But we will talk about the games coming up and quickly get to last week in the Canadian Football League as things get very interesting down the stretch to the playoffs. But obviously, with such a big event and announcements for the league yesterday, that is going to be the focus of today's show. So welcome, everybody, especially new folks that maybe haven't seen CFL 110. You can join us weekly Tuesdays right here on Winnipeg Sports Talk for the latest from around the league. We will get to our picks coming up for the upcoming week in the Canadian Football League. But as I said, the majority of this program, in all likelihood, will be focusing on everything that was announced yesterday by the Canadian Football League. Just before we welcome Jeff in, a couple quick things. Huge thanks to our sponsors over at CoolBet. We will be looking at the CoolBet lines for the games a little later on. And should mention to you, we've got another Wednesday night poker night tomorrow, 8 p.m. Central. You can check out at Sports Talk WPG on X and Instagram for details. Certainly my Twitter feed at Hustlerama. We're doing it over at CoolBet. You can download the poker app. The tournament will start at 8 p.m. $30 entry. There'll be a $100 bounty on my head, on Michael Remus's head. Heck of a lot of fun. So for any people that maybe didn't know that we run these kind of on a monthly basis, here's your heads up. Join us tomorrow, 8 p.m., and you can hit us up on X. Got any questions about that? But let's just get right to it because we have a lot to get to. Let's welcome in Jeff Hamilton from the Winnipeg Free Press. We dive into a very big day yesterday in the Canadian Football League. And Hammer, I will say this, just from almost a fan's perspective yesterday, maybe the most noteworthy thing of it all was the fact that just about everybody was tuning in at noon yesterday, not really knowing what the commissioner was about to announce. Credit to whoever was involved in not getting the leaks out, because I will say this was by far one of the most anticipated sports press conferences I can remember in Canadian sport in a long time. And it certainly delivered with some pretty significant changes that we're going to dive into.
Haas, I'm going, I'm excited that you're excited to get right into it. I'm going to take the opportunity to say hello and good morning to everybody. First, I also want to note very quickly, I feel like ever since I won one of those CoolBet tournaments, my inbox has been lacking any kind of future invites to future tournaments. I'm not sure what that's all about, but hopefully
if you're not in tomorrow, you are just admitting that it was a fluke.
Okay, well, then I guess I'm in tomorrow. Then I guess that's I guess we've confirmed that. Okay, cool bet. Thank you. We'll do that. The other thing I also thought, as you mentioned, with Strevler's performance, how you thought it launched this emergency press conference to go over that. I thought it was a direct reflection of the success we've been having at CFL 110. This idea that the 110 is supposed to reflect the length of the field here, Huss. And now you're telling me we're going to CFL 100 starting in 2027? Well, that's if they think they're going to shut us down, we're just going to come back twice as hard. But anyways, back to being serious and what was very serious and significant announcement and rule changes here. And to your point, I think that was a bit of a reflection of what is to come, the secrecy behind the announcement. As you mentioned, this is the crazy football league. This is a league where, you find out if someone farts, right? Like that's just how talkative people are in this 3-down game. And for it to really hold secrecy all the way to the announcement was incredible. And again, why I say a reflection of I believe it's the head office at the CFL taking things incredibly serious. Dare I suggest, Huss, taking themselves incredibly serious. Look at the press conference yesterday. Look how nice it looked. Look how polished it looked. Look how performative in some ways it looked. I've been covering this league daily for the last decade or so. I've never seen a press conference look as polished. And I was going around making my phone calls, trying to ruin the surprise, if you will, and was hitting wall after wall after wall. Like, this was a extra week, as the kids call it, in preparation for this announcement. Not only in its execution and in fact finding and information gathering, but then at the end, this required not just a, hey, promise me you won't say anything, Huss. I'm hearing there were NDAs signed throughout the league office to all the big players, and that's probably the vibe moving forward here as they continue to pick at this game and continue to make what are paramount and certainly long-lasting effects to the game that's going to have a mark on it for arguably generations.
Yeah, listen, I'll certainly echo that. I thought it was certainly well delivered. I mean, whether people appreciated the message or the actual content of it, that is in the eye of the beholder, I guess. But the way it was done was, was first class. And listen, I think Stuart Johnson has come into this job after nearly 3 decades at the helm of TSN, working very closely with the Canadian Football League, and has realized that there were some areas of the operation that they needed to step up, and obviously he's looking to do that. The actual changes, though, have been discussed, I'm sure, in some circles for a long time. Some others are a little bit more innovative. And we'll get into the reaction. I mean, I'll just run down. If people somehow missed this yesterday, these are the key changes, and we're going to go through them on an individual basis to talk about the effect on the game and our thoughts on them. But it is a phased approach. So some of these rules will go in 26, others will go in 27. And just to quickly run down them, the Rouge is modified. No more points for missed field goals through the end zone or punts through the end zone. And I guess kickoffs as well, if that would be the case. They're looking to increase the entertainment of the game by getting more aggressive play calling. And the bottom line is, and listen, he basically said as much, the embarrassment level for the league if the championship or a playoff game was won on a missed field goal would be significant. This has been talked about for a long time. It will be enacted. The Rouge will not be gone, though. Punts going into the end zone will need to be returned out of the end zone, or a single will be given, as well as kickoffs and field goals that don't get the part of that. Of course, is going to be getting the moving of the goalposts. We'll get those in a second because that is a 26. The clock is going to be changed. Game flow will be improved with an automatic 35-second play clock beginning as soon as the previous play is whistled dead. We will get into that. And then for 27, it will be a league mandate that benches need to be on opposite sides. That is the case in most of the CFL buildings, but not the rest of the league. And then a couple more big ones. In 2027, the goalposts will be moved back to the back of the end zones. This was a big point of contention for Stuart Johnson right from the get-go. And as part of that, the field will be changed. It will be adjusted from 110 yards to 100 yards. The 20-yard end zones in most CFL stadiums will now be standard. 15 yards will be the distance of the end zone, and the field goals, the posts, will be at the back. So in essence, you're talking 130 yards from the back field goal post to the field goal post on the other side, 2 15-yard end zones, and a 100-yard field. Hammer, just before we kind of dive into what we like and what we don't like, let's first talk about the reaction that we're hearing, from around the league, but also ourselves. On the surface, how did you take all of this? Do you think it is good? Are these positive changes moving forward? And how much does this alter the integrity and the Canadiana, if you will, of the Canadian Football League?
I'll just say one quick thing. The sidelines thing, as you mentioned, it was 2027. That will be a 2026 change. So the benches will be on opposite sides starting next season.
Oh, the benches. Okay, excuse me.
Yeah, so just part of the clock and stuff. It's just a 2026 one. It's the biggest issues between 26 and 27 are rule changes versus structural issues, right? Where it takes structurally changing the length of the field. So they're giving teams that extra year and a half, if you will, to move the goalposts, to shorten their field and end zones to what are now, as you mentioned, 15-yard end zones and 100-yard field.
There could be big logistical challenges.
Big time. So that's why they're giving, like, if they could, they would make that 2026, but they're giving teams to roll it in. As for reaction, Huss, I think it was fairly predictable. I think you saw fierce reaction, whether that be from fans who were, some of whom love the uniqueness, the traditionalists, if you will, love every bit of the league and those things that make it unique, including where the goalposts are, how long the field is. And then you saw, I guess you could argue more progressive fans who also watched the league, who saw these changes as quality changes, who saw them as smart changes, and in some cases, obvious changes, right? And so, to talk about my opinion, I think it's important to talk about where I'm coming from. I went to Winnipeg Blue Bomber games as a young kid with my twin brother, as my dad's company was a corporate sponsor, and we got to go to games. I didn't really pay attention. It wasn't one of those, rah Blue Bombers. It was like my dad used it for babysitting. He went with his corporate buddies up in the in the section, had fun, and me and my brother chased Yellow Pages footballs. And then we became teenagers, and we didn't really continue that enjoyment for the CFL, and then went into early adulthood and paid attention to it, but wasn't a CFL hardcore. I didn't really get into the Canadian Football League until 2016, and this isn't to tell fans or to that I wasn't a lifelong CFL fan. I got into it big time in 2016, and by 2018 I was the president of the Football Reporters of Canada. I fell in love with the Canadian Football League for what it is, and so I have a bit of a unique story in that I wasn't somebody who was going to Bomber games, but I wasn't going every week with my dad, and it was this tradition, and it's rooted in my soul. I wouldn't even really say I was a Bomber fan, and I certainly, after taking over the role as beat reporter, did not become a fan. However, I became a fan of the league. I became a fan of the rules. And so I certainly understand the uniqueness and why those people feel the way that they do. They feel protective of the league. They feel, I've heard this statement a lot. If I wanted to watch the NFL, I would watch the NFL, right? It's those rules that make that big difference from the American game to the Canadian game. Personally, I don't mind these rules. I don't think they're aggressive. Some cases they're aggressive. I'm not going to sit there and tell a traditionalist that moving a 110-yard field or eliminating the beloved 55-yard line isn't drastic change. It absolutely is, but it does what I think it was measured with were the things that do make it truly Canadian as well. The Rouge, while modified, is modified. We'll get into that. It's still there. There's still 12 players on a side. It's still got the 65-yard length. It's still, width. It's still got, 3 downs, obviously, which I think if, I was talking to some friends yesterday, Haas, I think if Stuart Johnson just went to the mic, kept everything exactly the way it was, goalposts and all, end zones, field, and said, we're moving to a 4-down game, there would have been absolute chaos, right?
That would have been a deal breaker.
That would have been a deal breaker for a ton of people. And I still think that some of these things are deal breakers. We'll get into, I think, after we go to the individual changes here, what this could mean for long term. And I think that's where I find, I'm a little bit less, encouraged by these changes, and why I think there is reason to be skeptical in what happened yesterday. We'll get to that. But right now, let's focus on the individual changes.
Yeah, listen, for me, I was, worried that, maybe there would be something far more extreme when we talk about affecting the amount of Canadians that are playing this game. I think that is part of the heartbeat, Canadian players playing Canadian football. Certainly the 3 downs, the motion, before the snap, the width of the field. I can live with it being, and in fact, I've just solved a problem for people that miss the 55-yard line. We're going to keep center field as the 55-yard line, and the goal lines are now the 5-yard line. Everyone happy? You will still see that 55 out at the center of the field. I joke. But listen,
like hotels where they skip the 13th floor.
Exactly.
To skip the 5-yard line and just make it 0.
That's the 5-yard line is now the goal. You got first and goal, 1 yard from the 6.
Yeah. Exactly.
Hey, more quirkiness in the Canadian Football League. Listen, the bottom line is I think these changes were made to improve the game. Hand up, I'll be honest. And maybe it's being a Winnipeg guy and thinking fondly of Cody Fajardo sticking that final attempt in the West Final, clanging it off the goalposts. But, I've talked with people for years about, what should the CFL do? That actually has never been something that I've ever even talked about. Listening to the way it was described and now thinking back to all the times where that has been an issue, I can't say that I disagree. I mean, the one thing, and it is a little ironic that we're having this conversation today, and Dustin Nielsen, who of course does a great job calling games, and I do the lock shop with him weekdays over on Edmonton Sports Talk, came on WST yesterday, and he said, the one thing that he will miss is the missed field goal returns. And of course, we're having this conversation.
You're just jumping right to the goalposts, eh? Just jumping right to the goalpost conversation.
A few days removed from, Trey Vavel, potentially saving the Bombers' season with a missed field goal return in that game against Ottawa. So, I mean, that is unfortunate. But when you really break down how often that happens, it is not truly significant. I think there's been 3 all year. Vavel's had 2 of them, to be perfectly honest with you. As far as the clock, my big concern,
Pimpleton might have something to say about it.
Yeah, well, listen, there'll be a couple players that'll
he tied it for the Ottawa Red Blacks against the Bombers on the exact same play.
This is sort of how I guess the Bombers were involved in all of those plays.
Yeah, it seems like it.
If you've been watching the Bombers, this is a non-issue so far this year. Moving the uprights. I mean, the teams being on opposite sides is a no-brainer, and that probably should have been mandated earlier. That is definitely positive. I don't know why anyone would have an issue with that. And obviously, I think I can wrap my head around the modified Rouge, although that wasn't something that I was banging the drum on or all of that. The bottom line is this. There's not a single thing that came out of Stuart Johnson's mouth yesterday that to me is a hill to die on. Other people have different observations and different feelings about it. But I can't wrap my head around how they're doing it. I will certainly give it a chance and look at it forward. I mean, as always, when you have big changes, there's some people that are real positive about it, and there are others that are saying, including on our show yesterday, that dropped in going, "That's it, I'm going to cancel my season tickets." To me personally, that's maybe a little bit of an overreaction, but I mean, everyone's going to make their own decisions on this, and move forward. So, listen, just piece by piece, let's get into this. The Rouge and the clock. These will be going in next year. I mean, a modified Rouge where if you punt it through the end zone, you're not getting a point. You miss a field goal that goes to the end zone, you're not getting a point. There still will be the impetus on kickoffs and punts that go into the end zone for the returner to pick the ball up and get it out of the end zone or give up a single point. I can wrap my head around that. And then, of course, the other one is the 35-second clock. And maybe you can speak to this. I know you've made some calls. Like in on its own, having the 35-second play clock run from the second the play goes, I think that's great. That'll keep things moving. My biggest concern, and I didn't entirely get all the questions answered on this. I mean, we saw an NFL game between the Chiefs and the Giants on Sunday that finished up after the 2-minute warning in victory formation, and the coaches were shaking hands at the center of the field at 20 seconds left. I don't want that happening in the Canadian Football League. I love how much can happen in the final 3 minutes. I guess if there was one area that I haven't totally been sort of filled in on is how that is going to change the final 3 minutes of the game. And I hope that doesn't significantly change it. But thoughts on the Rouge and the clock right now that we will see come kickoff of next season in the CFL?
I'll start with the clock and go back to the Rouge. So the clock, I actually think this is my favorite rule. I think this is the most underrated and makes the most sense because I'll address first your question about the last 3 minutes, because I think that's what everybody's asking. Everyone looks at an extended play clock and automatically believes that, okay, well, now you can just ice more of the game at the end. And we all know how exciting that final 3 minutes are. I do have some good news on that. It doesn't exactly, it's going to probably be more than 20 seconds, I imagine. It could be in and around 20 seconds still in those final 3 minutes, because that clock is a continuous clock. But in the final 3 minutes, the ball still needs to be set for the time clock to actually go. So in that sense, I think what they'll end up doing, what will end up happening is, once the play is done, that 35-second clock will start running, and by the time they actually set the ball and get it to go, I imagine it will be in and around that 20 seconds. Might be an extra 5 seconds, might be whatever it is, right? If a team wants to get up to the line quicker, 10 seconds goes by pretty quickly, right? So maybe it's an extra 5 seconds, but it won't be like the clock is just going to run right after a run play, and then the clock continues to run, and then you just ice the game like that. It is going to go back. I think the league needs to do a better job of clarifying that and what it looks like. I think these are some of the things that they're going to figure out as time goes on, make potential amendments for it. But I do think the clock's more important outside of those 3 minutes, the last 3 minutes of each half. And that's because I think a lot of fans don't understand this. I certainly do, watching the games as closely as I do covering them. Sometimes, it's an arbitrary blow-in of the 20-second clock, right? So in a typical pass completion or a run play, it doesn't result in a first down or just keeps the clock going. That just keeps going. Sometimes it takes 25, 30 seconds or more to set the ball, and then you get the additional 20 seconds. If you go look at the playlist, sometimes each play lasts, including the time of the play, over a minute each. And I know I get that email from people all the time, from readers and viewers all the time, saying it's not a true 20-second clock. So I like this because it takes that arbitrary element out of the play clock to make it more consistent. And that was the whole point here. So once the play ends, you got 35 seconds, right? You got 35 seconds to go, get ready, right? If it's an incomplete pass, again, the ball needs to be set still, and then it will eventually take 10 to 15 seconds to set that ball. I do think in the long run, it will result in more time to play less rather than less time, which I think is a lot of people's fears. Moving on to, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, that's I think what people want and need to hear, because and listen, these people aren't dumb. I mean, they know they're making aggressive changes and they're doing it with the best interest of the game in mind. Having less football and less excitement in the last 3 minutes is not a positive for the Canadian Football League. So I don't think that will be the end result of this, or certainly that's not the way that it was designed. The Rouge.
The Rouge for me, you know what? Like I count myself in that group of people who, I guess this makes me not a traditionalist, but I absolutely hated that Toronto Argonauts game where Liram Hajrullahu, lines up a game-winning field goal, misses it, and still is cheering with his fans. And I'm glad that the league put that in their promotional video for this. I just think it's super lame. And the fact of the matter is, it's embarrassing for the league. And you can love the league for what it is. You can love the quirkiness. I love the quirkiness of the game, but I get the business model of it because I have friends. I think it's an even split. I think there's a lot of people in this country that do love it. I think there's a ton of people who love this game that hate it, who don't like the end of that. I have friends who follow this game, and the ones that don't follow this game think it's a joke. You know who else thinks it's a joke? Whoever is in the United States of America watching that game. And I know this is the CFL, and I get the reminder, what does the C stand for? Well, the fact of the matter is, what Stuart Johnson didn't say in his press conference was that Americans look at the, and we'll get to the goalpost because it applies here, the goalpost at the front of the end zone. They look at a kicker kicking a ball and winning a game off a missed field goal, and they never want to watch this league again. They don't want to bet on this league again. They don't want to touch it. And guess what? That exists in Canada too. There's people in Canada who aren't as invested that could be more invested in this game, whether it be through gambling options or other outlets that just look at those rules and think it's ridiculous. So I'm not against I'm glad they kept the Rouge. I'm glad there's still an opportunity to get that single point. I do think that's unique. I think it existing, regardless of it maybe being less and less occasions, it's still significant that it's there. The last thing I'll say about the Rouge and what's disappointing, and talk about both great timing for Trey Vavel, but horrible timing for Stuart Johnson, was his return his returns in that game against Ottawa. His 128-yard return was the most exciting game in an otherwise pretty horrible game to watch, right? So, he must have hated that. So that was the bad timing. The good timing, Trey Vavall set a new single game CFL record for the most yards on missed field goal returns. In a handful of months here, Huss, that will never be able to be broken again. So for a rookie player to come in and rewrite a record that will probably never get touched again unless that rule gets modified back to what it was, that's a pretty interesting thing. That's the one thing I'll miss, but I do think it's a trade-off if it does lead to more touchdowns in the end.
You know what? I'm looking at the chat right now. And by the way, thanks to everyone that's here with us live. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and join us on Tuesdays throughout the CFL season. And of course, daily 1 p.m. Central on Winnipeg Sports Talk for more on the CFL. I see Ernie Waldner. Love the change to the Rouge. About time. I mean, it is important, and you make a very good point. This is not something that was unanimously beloved by all Canadian football fans and kind of thought of and side-eyed by people outside the country. I mean, it was and has always been a very, very divisive topic. Mm-hmm. And I think you will get support from a lot of people. And I'm not sure the game is going to suffer because we won't be rewarding missed field goals or punts through the end zone with a single point anymore. The goalpost is a big one. And Stuart Johnson started with this. Listen, if you watched the press conference yesterday, he spoke with some personal experience that I think he's been sitting on for the better part of 35 years. I laughed out loud when I saw your tweet that if that pass in 1989 by the now commissioner of the Canadian Football League didn't hit the uprights, maybe that press conference doesn't even happen.
Maybe we don't have this historic day. That's the truth. That's the vibe I got. What a weird part of the conference that was.
But it the field goal posts will no longer be on the goal line. They will move to the back of the end zone, as we mentioned, the end zones, which are not uniform throughout the league. There's like 17 or 18 yards in a couple places, 20 elsewhere. Will be shortened to 15. It'll still be the biggest end zones in professional football. And now, I mean, the positive of this from the commissioner is that they're out of the way. And listen, this is another thing that I'll hand up. I hadn't really thought about or focused on, but it does make sense that when you realize where these goalposts are and look at how CFL offenses work, that they, for the most part, have stayed away from the middle of the field. And this really opens things up significantly for the offense. And of course, now you need to chew up more of the field, albeit smaller, going from 110 to 100 to actually kick that field goal, because there's another 15 yards of distance to get to from the goal line, or the 5-yard line in my proposal, to the back of the end zone where the goalposts are. How significant of a change is this in your mind, and does it make sense moving forward?
Yeah, so this is where I kind of stop being so kind, I think, or being maybe positive about the changes. These are the things that bug me. These are the structural changes that I think, and I feel like as a public, as whether it be media, whether it be fans, I feel like this is the part we're being misled about. This idea, like, I don't think that Stuart Johnson can stand up at that podium and address to people with such conviction and tell them that we care about tradition, we care about, the things that make this league unique, and then follow that up by ripping literally those things out of the ground, including the goalposts. Like, I'm not a fan of the goalposts. I don't hate the goalposts being there. I'm not a fan of it, but I understand that makes the Canadian Football League unique. It affects everything. It affects field goal kicks. It affects, red zone play. It affects everything. It's sitting right there. It's some of the most unique moments that we've watched. Whether it be Cody Fajardo in 2019 in the West Final, like the doink, right? Like, we've seen that it happened since then. These are moments in the game. They're obstacle. Like, it's now being described as an obstruction for middle of the end zone passes. Yeah, that's part of the complexities of the CFL game. And to remove that, to me, is to remove a foundational piece of the fabric of this league. And so goalposts, to me, like, yeah, I can see how it makes sense on the surface about, more touchdowns possibly, but the results of them, the losing the missed field goal returns, to me, I'm not on board with it. Like, I get it, I can understand it, but I certainly understand the concerns around things like moving the goalposts to the back. And I mean, we'll get into more of the long-term stuff, which I'll probably be even less nice about when we go through this. But for me, the goalpost, while it seems to make sense, to me, I do think, I don't know if it was necessary. Like, it to me, and that was obviously Stuart Johnson's number one thing. And he knew that if he moved the goalpost, he could figure everything else out, right? Like he could shorten the field, he could shorten the end zones, right? Because with the longer field, moving those goalpost to the end of the end zone just makes it more difficult to score points. That doesn't make any sense. This to me was a direct response, and I'll get more into it when we go deeper into what this all means. This was to me catering to the American viewership, because Americans will watch this game, to my earlier point, see the goalpost sitting there at the start of the end zone, wonder what the heck is going on, and that in a lot of cases, I imagine, is enough to tune the league out. This isn't real football. I don't want to pay attention to it. So to me, that's the reason why the goalposts are gone, regardless of the added math of completed touchdowns. Scoring touchdowns isn't an issue in the CFL. Can you always want more touchdowns? Absolutely. But I don't think that the goalposts in the middle are necessarily affecting that. And will be very curious to see how many more touchdowns it adds by removing it.
I mean, they estimated 60 more yesterday. Yeah. Now, you can buy that or sell that. I mean, I guess we'll find out in the coming years. I mean, I went into this with an open mind. As I mentioned before, this is not something that I'd ever really thought of as a big issue. But I have to admit, to me, in my opinion, I thought he made a compelling case for why this will be good for the game and moving forward. And listen, I mean, I want the CFL to be fun, to be exciting. I want it to be high scoring. I want touchdowns more than field goals, as much as it's always fun to see Sergio Castillo get out and blast one from 57 or 60 yards. And I can wrap my head around the intention of this. And based on the analytic, numbers and, everything that they showed in there, I think there is a really compelling argument for this. As I mentioned, the one downside of this is that the missed field goals in the Canadian Football League, while rare, can be returned and can be incredibly exciting. We've seen a few occasions of that so far this year with the Winnipeg Blue Bomber games. But overall, based on what they're doing for the league moving forward, I think that this is something that does make a lot of sense. Hopefully that will show when the finished product is out there and they make these changes. But I don't see a big, listen, having the goalpost act as the 13th man of defense, I don't think is actually a positive, unless you were a Bomber fan on that faithful day at that cold Princess Auto Stadium when the team won the West Finals. So, I mean, to me, this actually is a positive, although I realize that it is a big change. And for some people, it is hard to sort of wrap their heads around. I mean, in concert with the goalpost moving.
There's one more thing, though, Huss. Yep. Sorry. There's one more thing that I don't quite understand and haven't seen to begin an answer with the goalpost. Like, where did the extra points get kicked from? Are they now at the 10-yard? Or are they now at the, what would it be, 22-yard line to make it a 32-yard kick? Like, how, or do my math here, 17-yard line, whatever it is. So that we're still unsure about. Like, is it still going to be it's a
37-yarder right now?
It's 32 yards right now.
32 yards right now. All right. So the 7. So it would probably be going from the 10.
So I think that, I mean, it's an easy thing to mix, but it's just, we haven't really got clarity. These are things they're going to iron out, but I never heard any clarity on that. Anyways, moving on.
Now the field length is, and this is one that, certainly some hardcore traditionalists don't like. Listen, if you're talking about the field, to me, it's the width of the field. It's having the 12 players on. It's having the motion before, and that will not be touched. We've talked about moving the end zones to the field goal post to the back of the end zones, which obviously significantly changes where teams will be kicking field goals from. And part and parcel of that is moving to a 100-yard field. Just a quick note, and I'll give a shout out to Joe Pascucci, and people in the Winnipeg area are very familiar with Scooch. He's the true historian of Winnipeg sports, longtime sports director here in the city, and he unearths incredible footage all the time. You can give him a shout out at Pascucci015 on X. And he put out one yesterday that absolutely blew me away. And listen, I am not old enough to remember Blue Bomber football at the old Osborne Stadium. It was before I was around. But Joe posted a tweet that had video of the Bombers playing at Osborne Stadium and said, back then, the Bombers played on a 100-yard field with 15-yard end zones. And it seems like the CFL is going back to the future. So that was just an interesting note that I don't think a lot of people that might be pounding their fist on the desk knew. But from your perspective, thoughts on, in addition to the field goal post going to the back, in concert with that, shrinking the field 10 yards.
I had no idea that was the case.
Blew me away.
And I never saw Joe's tweet. So thanks for bringing that up. That is interesting. Maybe that does soften the blow, if you will, to some of the more traditionalist fans. But I do think...
I just want to see like an 80-year-old guy going, I told you it was better back at Osborne Stadium when we had the 100-yard field.
For sure, yeah. He's having his day right now. Yeah, exactly. He's saying what now? Guys kept his winter tires on year-round all year to have those same kind of conversations when the snow falls. But here's the thing. Like, I do think, like, I mentioned earlier in the show, like, if you would have went up to that podium and changed it to 4 downs, there would have been a revolt. But this is the thing. The next most important thing, I would argue, is the length of the field, right? They're known, like...
Oh, the width is way more important than the length to me.
It is.
Way more.
But that's objective. That's to you, Huss. I think a lot of people take for granted the width, right? They know it's longer, but no one...
but the width affects the play 100%, way more than the length.
But I'll be frank with you, man. I'll be frank with you. I had no idea until they told me in the news release that they were keeping it to 65-meter or 65-yard length or whatever it is, right? Like, I had no idea it was 65 yards. I know that the CFL field's 110 yards. I know that the CFL has a 55-yard line. Those are synonymous with the 3-down game. And in one school, just swift of action, they got rid of both of them. So, like, if there's anything that I understand, traditionalists, people who love the unique rules of the Canadian game are pissed off or livid about, it's this part. And the league knows that. They knew what they could get to. They knew if they could, I don't want to say if they knew they could get away with 4 downs, they would have gone there right in this announcement. I don't think they're that dumb. But I do think that they were trying to get away with things, making things changes. And here's the reality, as I mentioned before, once you move the goalpost, you have to do the rest of that. And if we're led to believe, and it felt very clear in his press conference that was Stuart Johnston's number one issue, number one priority, to remove the goalpost. The rest of it had to come with it. I felt like that was his answer for all his issues, was to remove the goalpost. Because again, if you move the goalpost to the end of the end zone and you keep everything the way it is, you're making offense harder. So you had to adjust the field, and that's what he was able to do. But me personally, I kind of sit there and I go, okay, I still think, again, there's those foundational cornerstones of the league, the 3 downs, the 12 players, the width of the field, as you mentioned, as being even more important than the length. I do think those are intact. However, it's like any negotiation with fans. They don't want to give. They don't want to give 2 big things. Like what are they getting in return? A promise or a suggestion that there's going to be an increase in touchdowns. So I get the frustration for this. I also understand where the league is coming, and we'll get in. And that's kind of where we get into the long-term things here, because Huss, I don't want to take away.
Let's go right there now.
Because let's go there right now. Exactly. Like, to me, this for the next 2 years, Huss, it's going to be all about the Canadian Football League, right? They've made these changes. It's going to be all about implementing these changes while honoring the Canadian Football League and the 3-down unique game. However, in this time, with these changes being made, especially at the start of 2027, when we go to 100-yard fields, when we go to 15-yard end zones, when we have goalposts at the end of the end zones and not the front, how much harder will it be to be American? How much harder will it be to go from 3 downs to 4? How much harder will it be to go from 12 players down to 11? How much harder will it be to make the fields now skinnier? And I think that is the problem that a lot of people have, is that, yes, these changes aren't the worst case scenario or weren't necessarily what they were imagining when no one knew what was going on in the evening ahead of the next day's press conference, but they're still pretty systematically big changes. And anybody who has loved this league and committed money and, tickets, traveled to the Grey Cup, all these things, they are going to be rightfully upset with this and going to be rightfully afraid of what it could mean in the future here. And I say this, Huss, not like the CFL Board of Governors are sitting down with the American leagues or talking to the NFL and coming up with different ways to create unique partnerships and whatnot. But if they can succeed at the game of getting more eyeballs here in Canada, they're going to want to continue to grow, and they are going to put themselves in a position to do that. I only look at one person, and it's not the end all be all, but I do think it suggests what the minds of the CFL might be thinking, and that's Wally Buono. When they interviewed Wally Buono last year, a guy who has been used as a CFL consultant since the day he retired with the rest of the league, someone they lean on, when they asked him what he would do if he was commissioner, you know what he said? He said U.S. expansion. Because that's what growth is. This is 2025. We have a fan base in the CFL that is aging out, and there's a new demographic of fans that they haven't gripped a hold of. And by young fans, I mean 20s. I'm not even talking about.
It depends where you're talking about, right? Because that's not the case here in Winnipeg. That's not the case here in Winnipeg,
but it is across the CFL.
Yeah.
It is. I mean, great. Winnipeg and Saskatchewan can flourish while the other teams, are falling hard times. Anyways, my point is I understand the fear, because if all things go to plan, I think that is the obvious next step of this evolution we keep hearing about, is growing the game internationally. And that's what these field sizes does. That's what this change does. They aren't saying that because they can't guarantee it, but if it falls in their lap, they're certainly going to be considering it, and they're way better off transitioning to that right now than they ever have been, or more so starting for the 2027 season.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I get it. I mean, we are protective of what we have. We're protective of our game. But, I mean, it is important to note that, there's 2 out of 9 teams that are making money right now. And the commissioner has to find a way to make this league more financially viable for the very good group of owners we have. I'd argue that, this can happen right now because the league has as stable ownership as they've had maybe in the last 30 to 40 years. But I won't go so far as to say that this is just a long play to try to turn into American football. To me, the most important things that make the CFL what they are, the width of the field, the extra player, the Canadian content, the 3 downs, all weren't touched. And listen, if you have an open mind to this, I think that there's a very good chance that at the end, the product will be better. If you were married,
I can agree with that for sure.
If you were married to the fact that it is the way that it has always been and you don't like change, then, I mean, you're going to have a tough time getting on board with it. But I mean, at the end, the proof is going to be in the pudding. I mean, they don't want to take away from the game. They want to improve the game. And first and foremost, for CFL fans that are going to games, that are watching the games on TSN, you want that to be improved. If at the same time, it makes this product more attractive to people outside of Canada to watch it, to bet on it, to pay attention to it, I mean, that's a great thing business-wise. And to be honest, Jeff, the one thing that and maybe I'll throw this to you, just I know it's not on the rundown. There was a couple things that I was expecting to hear that we didn't hear.
Yep.
And number one was moving the schedule up 2, 3, 4 weeks earlier, maybe in kicking off in and around May long weekend, just before the beginning of June for the regular season, to take advantage of that dead time on the football calendar. Listen, North American sports, football is king, and it ain't even close. And the minute the NFL finishes up after the Super Bowl, you have this dead zone. The XFL has been in there before. The UFL has been in there before. And obviously the Canadian Football League, I love the CFL. I'm not showing up to Princess Auto Stadium at the end of February for a game. But to kick things off earlier when College football isn't playing. The National Football League aren't even in OTAs. If the Canadian Football League can grab more eyeballs from people outside of Canada that can help the game, having more of those games in that zone when you're not competing against college or the NFL, to me, is a no-brainer. And we've seen it kind of happen a little bit over the last few years, moving it up a couple weeks. I think there's more room to do that. And here's the other thing, just from a fan, and feel free to let me know what you think about in the chat if you're with us live. The difference from going to a game that's, say, 8 or 9 degrees at the end of May when things are getting nice and you can't wait to get outside is a heck of a lot different than at the end of October where it's getting a lot quieter. I mean, I think people would really embrace that. I think it would work for a number of levels, and I think it would be good. So I was surprised that the schedule hasn't been touched. I still would support that, and I think that probably will be coming at some point relatively soon. And then the other thing, and this isn't really this is all, I guess, more semantics because it doesn't change anything that happens on the field, moving this league to one division. I have long thought that a one division league, based on how small it is, would make the most sense. I know there are traditionalists that like the East and the West, and it seems like the league is always like that to have good representation. To me, and again, this looks to an eventual 10-team league if they can ever get that done. But a 10-team league with the even schedule where every team has one home game and one road game for 18 games on the schedule makes the most sense to me. It is perfectly fair. You would have the top 2 teams get buys. You'd have 3 versus 6. I'll tell you what, I would be all over some unique new playoff matchups. Winnipeg versus Ottawa in the wild card round. A Grey Cup between Hamilton and Toronto. BC playing Montreal. I mean, all of those things, I think it opens up. And, you know, as a guy that's loved the league for a long time, I'm not so much of a traditionalist that it has to be Edmonton versus Saskatchewan or the winner to play Winnipeg each and every time. So I hope that they consider that more moving forward. But to me, the schedule was something that I kind of thought would also be part and parcel of this. And to be honest, once it actually is instituted by 27, maybe we'll get there.
Yeah, I was teasing that out during that time, the evening before the press conference, teasing the idea out because of those reports about, oh, this looks like it might be, heading towards Americanization, some significant changes. When I suggested, well, what about these significant changes, right? The East and West divisions, and then having to change the traditional awards system in the respective divisions, right? Something that Stuart Johnson, in my conversation with him, I ended up having breakfast with him when he was in Winnipeg for like 2.5 hours. We covered that part of the list of issues, or you will, or topics to talk about, and I think he's all for. I don't want to put words in his mouth saying he's all for eliminating the divisions, but he's all for hearing them. Hearing about that argument, and particularly changing the system around awards, because I think he understands common sense a little bit in that respect. However, I do think that I do think he had a mandate day one, and that mandate was to shake things up. I think he came in with that mandate. A lot of people go, well, look at Stuart Johnston, and he's been on the job for 6 months, not even a year, and he's making massive changes. This guy was the president of TSN. Pretty much ran the league for a long time, right? Like this guy's had a seat at the table. He's watched the game. He's been to the Grey Cups. He's been into the commissioner addresses every year. He sits in meetings. He sat in meetings with the league. He's about as invested in the league as it gets. And I'd argue,
Jeff, that he's been the most influential person in the Canadian Football League.
Well, that's what I mean.
Past 20 years.
He's a new commissioner, but the power and influence that this man has wielded has been on for a very long time here. Like he's been, maybe not a face of the Canadian Football League, but he's been the face of TSN, which is the broadcast, the exclusive broadcast of the Canadian Football League. So he knows what's going on. I just don't think those things were in his priority list. And the last thing you want to do is do too many moving parts. Could you imagine adding that on to the list of things that they did on Monday? Like they already knew they were pushing the limits with what they were changing. They were not going to be making these additional colossal changes to the setup of the divisions, right? They're asking their teams to figure these things out. I'm not saying a change in divisions and awards would necessarily require teams adjust their their style of play or systems and whatnot. But I do think it's a lot of information at a little bit of time. And so I do think those potential things are coming. One of the things I think is going to come sooner than later that you mentioned, Tuss, was one of the first things. And that was, maybe altering the times in the league, right? Maybe that changes in 2027. Maybe that's a 2028 thing when they figure out, the logistical stuff of 2027. And of course the rules that are coming in next season, right? So like, I don't want to call it baby steps, but they're positioning themselves not to trip over themselves, right? Like they're trying to look professional in all this. The last thing they need is to create more moving parts, including, changing the divisions, adding more potential animosity to the fan base, right? I think this is a little bit of a, I know for some this ripped off the Band-Aid, but I think from the league's perspective, this might be a slower rip than just kind of dumping all these things. But that being said, I also think the focus has been obviously on these major changes. That's what a lot of the narrative would have been around. They wouldn't even have probably entertained conversations about changing divisions when they were going over such significant structural and rule changes to the league.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the awards because, like for instance, last year, I love the way the National Hockey League does it. You've got these awards and you have everyone votes and your top 3 finalists are the finalists for it. Like Connor Hellebuck won the Hart Trophy last year. It should not preclude Cale Makar or Connor McDavid from being a finalist for the award. I think you're able to recognize your players better and, include more people that would deserve it, and obviously still ending up on the player that is the most outstanding or most valuable or whatever the character is.
There's another thing, Huss, I wanted to ask you about. What do you we haven't touched it yet. What do you think about the player reaction? Because I'll tee up with this. Obviously, Nathan Rourke had some choice words, called the
wild
garbage, but then you had on the other, I don't want to say the other side, obviously, as far as opinion, but you had players like Bo Levi Mitchell taking to social media, a guy who's been in the league obviously a long time, having a great season, has been an MOP candidate the last couple of years and for a lot of his career. Him saying that, essentially saying that their brighter days are ahead, that he agrees with these decisions. Willie Jefferson, he didn't quite use that strength of language, but he tweeted out, these are the changes coming to the CFL, which, may be misstepping, but knowing the guy, I think he's representing that's a positive thing. If he didn't like it, he wouldn't be sharing it like that, right? So what do you make of the reaction from the player side? And I'll add this last part, Huss. It's not a coincidence to me that one of them is Canadian and the 2 others who are positive on it are American.
Yeah, I was shocked when I heard what Nathan Rourke had to say, and I don't know, the way when it came out, I wasn't sure whether he was more legitimately angered by some of the unique things of the Canadian game that was changing, or as arguably the face of the league that he wasn't consulted on it, because he did mention that. Listen, I've got ultimate respect for the players, the coaches, the general managers, everyone there, but I totally understand why these decisions were made without having everyone that's got a stake in kind of having their say. Because to be honest, you will always look out for what's best for you, for what's best for your particular team. And I think that would cloud people in some ways. The league needs to act in the best interest of the league with the vision moving forward. And it seems like they've done that. I thought Rourke kind of was over the top, to be honest with you, with it. Now, hey, listen, everyone's got their own opinion. You have it and say it. But for a guy that's the highest paid player, I believe, in the league, that is a true star in this league, that's grown up in Canadian football, that's been down to the NFL twice, I was just surprised. And here's the thing, for him to say that so loudly, everyone's talking about it. Lost in all of that is the Bo Levis and the Willies and the other players that actually I think are sort of warm to these changes right now. So I'll be very interested to hear from Nathan Rourke once the dust is settled, and whether he walks that back a little bit or gives it a little bit more time, or whether he continues to be guns blazing saying it's a terrible thing. But I was not expecting to hear that from the CFL's golden boy. It was surprising to me. And now listen, I heard Luke Wilson and Ches talking about it last night on the show, and Obviously Luke seems to be very much on side on this. He's basically been pounding the drum in as many ways, throughout the year on some changes. And listen, it's a very valid conversation to have. And I think it's been good for CFL circles and conversation in and around it. But Luke made a point that maybe not too many people would have the balls to say it, but he goes, listen, it's easy for Nathan Rourke to say that as the highest paid player in the league that's got the big contract that, is on all the posters. What about the guys that, are just getting by? What about the guys at the bottom? And if the goal of this is to bring the game forward and to make it better and more successful, those are the players that will be benefiting from it, albeit maybe in the long term after they're out. So, listen, I understand that there's viewpoints on both sides for fans as well as within the rank and file, even with the star players of the Canadian Football League.
Well, the thing about, and I don't want to dissect Nathan Rourke's comments too heavily. I kind of have two opinions on them. I do like the conviction in which he came out with. I do like the fact that he's kind of like, the big top Canadian in the league, and he's defending it. I know a lot of fans, particularly those traditionalists we talk about, or anybody who dislikes the rule changes, will have loved to hear that come from his mouth and obviously validate their arguments and their belief in where the league should go. There were a couple of things I thought were interesting. Like there were some things he was talking about that weren't being changed, which I think made me feel like maybe he didn't have all the information. The other thing too was, this is a guy who admittedly didn't grow up watching the Canadian Football League. I'm not saying his opinion doesn't matter. Of course it matters. It certainly matters a lot more than mine. But also, he described the CFL when he came here as I'm going to get this probably wrong, but it's close to this, like an unplanned detour. He was never planning to come to the CFL. Obviously, things didn't work out in the NFL for him, and now he's, kind of here popping off. I can appreciate where he's coming from, kind of have mixed feelings on it.
Well, he did say yesterday he grew up playing Canadian football, watching the Canadian football.
Yeah, but that contradicts some of his earlier comments. Like he had said that, in his news conference, but in prior interviews, he was open about not really watching.
He's now Captain Canada after he's come back and signed the big deal.
Which is great. Which I'm not gonna, I'm certainly not gonna, disrespect him in that regard. Like his opinion does matter. He is a position, and to Luke's point, I think he makes a valid point. What about those other guys? But, to play devil's advocate to his point, like those guys' points or opinions don't really matter as much as Nathan Rourke's. That's just the way things work. Like you wouldn't, I'm not comparing him to Tom Brady, but when Tom Brady played, his opinion mattered more than the guys that just got by in the NFL. Like nobody really cared about those guys.
There's a pecking order.
There is, absolutely. Sports. Yeah, it's professional sports. So I can appreciate both sides. And I think, as if we're wrapping up on kind of this title, I think I'll go back to one of my earlier points. It's going to be, I don't think there's obviously going to be a lot of changes here the next 2 years as they implement these changes beginning next season. Of course, the structural stuff in 2027. However, I think what's going to matter is after that. And I think the moves that are being made in 28, 29, 30 are going to be made kind of in these next 2 years. It's kind of like, look at this as like a player's 2-year contract, right? The first year, okay, this next year, it's going to be pretty easy. They're going to bring in a couple of these changes, yada, yada. It's going to be different, but it's going to be easy, an easier transition. And then in 2027, that's when people are really going to be like, whoa, this looks different. Like, I think it's going to be quite stark, if you will, that when you look at the stadium and you see the end zones on the opposite sides, you see the shorter field. Like I think people are going to have a response to that, an emotional response to that. But at the same time, I think the CFL is going to start turning heads with the new look of their situation, which would then be us selling to the US station. So like I think it's important to note, we haven't noted, I think I actually might have mentioned it with CBS, is their TV deal is up at the end of the 2026 season, right in line of showing what that next season could look like. So those conversations about 2027 and moving forward are going to be reflective of a football field that looks like an American football, or looks closer to an American football field. And I think that matters to executives at CBS. That matters to executives in streaming services in the States. They want a product that looks like it's American. So my point is that, yes, the next 2 years is going to be rah, 3 downs, Canadians, yada, yada, but there's going to be things in the works. I'm not suggesting automatic American expansion or anything like that. However, I think those thoughts are going to be had. Those conversations are going to be had. And as we've noticed here, Huss, they do things in pretty secrecy. And as Stuart Johnson mentioned, he likes pace. So they might become fast and furious. I think there's a 5-year plan for Stuart Johnson. I think there's probably a 10-year plan for Stuart Johnson. And when you have the full confidence from the Board of Governors of the CFL, you will get carte blanche to get that mandate done. And I think these next 2 years are going to be serious years of change. I'm really, really curious on what 28 and after looks like.
Well, if that's the case, good. And listen, I mean, as long as the 3 downs is there, the field is wide, there's 12 players, we've got the ratio, all those things that to me is the essence of what the CFL is. Like, listen, there's a lot of gatekeepers. There's people that don't want people in the States to be watching it. This is our game. No, not me. I mean, listen, to me, it's American expansion. I don't know. We've been there. I don't know whether it'll work. That's a big undertaking if they ever want to consider doing that again. But in the short term, the more eyeballs on the league, the better. Like, let's get these games on even a better television contract. And this is part of moving the season up. Those early season games, I think, will be viewed far more because people are dying for football south of the border. Obviously, there's a gambling side to things. The more people you can get betting on the games, the more they're paying attention to it, and it can all help out. So I certainly hope that is the case, and I hope that the first big wins in all of this is increased exposure and a better TV deal in the United States, as well as potentially a new TV deal in Canada that ironically Stuart Johnson coming from TSN that's had exclusivity on all this along. It sure would be nice to get the folks on the other side of the street at Rogers involved in the Canadian Football League and not seemingly purposely ignoring it because they don't have a piece of it. And that's part of a 2-horse sports broadcasting system that we have here in Canada. One other thing that we haven't talked about is the fallout of this here in the country at a grassroots level. Right now, like, listen, if you grow up, I grew up playing 6- and 9-man football. I mean, high school football is 12-man. University football here is 12-man in Canada for the most part. Moving the goalposts and changing the size of the field is a massive, massive change when it comes to the grassroots levels. And I do wonder what happens with with football at all of those levels. I mean, I'll just use the example here in Winnipeg. Like, the University of Manitoba Bisons share a stadium with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. That field is going to change. I don't think that they're going to have an option in, putting the goalpost back for Bison games and adding the extra 5 yards. So I really do wonder what happens at U Sports. And then, at minor football levels, and listen, flag football is the fastest growing sport anywhere, but it is incredibly, despite all the worries of concussions, at least around here, really added to the growth of football. Like the high school league, when I was in, I think we had 10 teams or something like that. There's 34 teams now playing tackle football at a high school level, which if you told me that was the case 10 years ago, I would have said zero chance. All of these leagues and teams are going to be affected as to how they move forward, and there's going to be costs and logistics to keep up with the CFL, and I do wonder if that happens. And I guess the other part of it, Jeff, is we can talk about, there's some areas, in my opinion, this might be a hot take, that are a little more Canadian than others. It's not lost upon me that BC is playing 4-down football at the high school level, and there's a lot of 4-down football in Ontario as well. So the fact that this changes, I don't know whether this does anything to bring minor football onto a more of an even playing field because people are making their decisions in different areas and worrying about their own. But it does open up a lot of significant challenges for football at every level to either go along with these changes and spend the money and the logistic that takes to get there, or go their own way and have major changes when you go from level to level or league to league.
Yeah, I'm as you were winding down your part, I was thinking of how to politely word this, like the
you don't
league
care?
Yeah, they just don't care. Like, I mean, it's not that they don't care about youth sports. They don't care about, the athletes that come out of youth sports. And I suppose you can make the argument that because of the athletes that come out, because of the role that youth sports plays in feeding players, that maybe they should have had a bigger spot at the table. Here's the problem. I just don't think they trusted a lot of people with this information, right? Like, and they weren't going to add another person, in the youth sports world to share this information with until they felt it was the right time to share, which included, like, let's put it this way, Huss. If they're not telling their coaching staff and their GMs, they're not telling youth sports. Like, they're not giving them a heads up. And again, I don't mean to make light of it. I'm just saying that's just not.
Oh, yeah. Like, no, listen, I'm not saying that they should.
And I'm not saying they should care. Sorry, I'm not saying they should care. And I'm not beating up on youth sports either.
I just wonder how they go forward.
Yeah, they got to figure it out. Right. I mean, I think this is part of the transition here. Right. Like, I think the CFL, again, classify this under what they're not saying is, why wouldn't you change to us? You know what I mean? Like, we're the Canadian Football League. We're the feeder league for you guys. You change to our rules. Like, when the NHL changes something, you think they go to the AHL and go, hey, you cool with us changing this? Yada, yada. It's get on board, right? Like, this is what you're going to do. And so I think the reality here is, yeah, it creates a little bit of like a headache. And, they're probably scrambling. Youth sports, particularly, youth sports is notoriously for taking forever for change too, right? If you followed any of the stuff with the University of the West Coast losing whatever that, I forget it now.
Dude, that's not it's even like, just youth sports. That's universities in general.
Exactly. That's universities in general.
Anything done at a university.
Exactly. So, but back on track, like, the 26 is the easy rule changes. If they don't want to do the rule changes for next season, they don't have to do the rule changes for next season. If it's going to be an issue with their, governing board and they can't vote in these things and yada, yada, then they won't do it. Right. However, they're going to have to make some changes for 2027 when, as you mentioned, whether it be the Bisons or any other university league that team that shares a facility with the CFL team. I think it's just going to come down to forced change. Like, they're going to change to 100-yard fields. They're going to change to 15-yard. They're going to use whatever the facility makes them use. Like, they don't have a choice. Like, what is youth sports going to do? What are they going to?
Well, here's the thing.
Are they going to find a new field? The
Bisons will change, but what about Saskatoon? So
this is Calgary? The other thing I think, and I've heard this already, and Justin Dunk did a great interview from 3 Down Nation with youth sports, one of the youth sports leaders there, right? And talking about some of these things, and I was able to catch that. So I'll take just, when I'll be clear in his interview that, the gentleman, I forget his name, was talking about like how quickly this had just turned around, right? So he's not saying any definitive answers, but it might turn into, and he even referenced like Major League Baseball, right? Like, what one field might look like at a different field. You might just have different size fields. You might have similar rules, you might have put the play clock in or whatever, but you might have a different field in Winnipeg than you would in Saskatoon, than you might have in Regina, which you might have in Edmonton, right? You might have different size fields, different size end zones. I don't think that's as big a deal at the university level. Like, does it knock on professionalism a little bit? Yeah, sure. I guess it takes a couple hits there, but you kind of deal with what you got. I mean, if you wanted to go do different fields, smaller venues, do the lines that way, that's a lot of money. So I think what's going to happen here is next year is going to be, okay, you have starting now. So it's not starting next season, starting now, figure your stuff out, figure if you want to incorporate the rules that we're doing in 2026. Personally, I think they should, get that on board, get that going, work with the CFL, right? Because I think the CFL will be open to kind of holding their hands here, right? They want them to do this. They're not telling them they have to do it, but they obviously want them to do it. And then work with the league, whether it's funding certain things, try to find money from the CFL. If the CFL is going to make these changes, try to pressure them to put up some money to help, with their situation. So whatever that may look like. But I do think that, maybe early on, particularly in the 2027 season, we're going to have different fields in different places. That's just the reality and the reality of the situation when the priority is clearly on the Canadian Football League and not on youth sports.
Yeah, listen, I think you're right. I think youth sports will try to adapt, and we'll see how that goes.
I'm sure the league will pressure them to adapt too. Like, why wouldn't they adapt? What's the reasons not to adapt, right?
Because it's really expensive and they don't have the money to change these fields. I mean, it's very simple. I mean, even if the
other rules, the 35-second clock, those things, right? Like those are things that their players are going to have to learn if they want to get in the Canadian Football League. That's a no-brainer. The other facilities, again, like I do think there is room here to work with the CFL to fund some of these things, right? If the CFL wants to have it prides itself and takes youth sports seriously, the least they can do is help them find ways to financially support this and bring them on board to these changes. I think that's the least.
I would argue just that the best way to do that is to have a more healthy, flourishing league and actually have the money to be able to do all of that. And I guess that kind of gets back to why they're doing this all in the first place. Listen, it's been an awesome show with everyone in chat. If you do want, we'll certainly be talking about this more in future episodes of Winnipeg Sports Talk, daily at 1 p.m. Central, here live on YouTube. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get it. And I'll look forward to reaching out to the head of Football Canada as well. Because this question about the game outside of the CFL is an interesting one. And how the national governing body reacts is
and that's a great point too, because you got other leagues, right? We're talking university, but what about high school? What about amateur football, right? Those, to your point about money, those aren't necessarily quick fixes. I mean, I guess it's better. I guess it's better to scale back than it is to build more. But maybe it'll be an interesting situation.
Maybe we get more Ontarians and British Columbians actually playing Canadian football instead of just going and playing U.S. 4-down football. That to me would be a positive change of all of this, if that is the case. Listen, no surprise, we've gone so long talking about this. We don't have a lot of time to dive into Week 16 in the Canadian Football League. I will put this into one segment. I mean, games last week, we had Montreal beat Toronto 21-19, a bit of a field goal fest. Edmonton fell just short against the Tiger Cats, really hampered their pursuit of a playoff spot. Meanwhile, BC and Winnipeg both won. These are the games that I want to touch on. BC drops the 50-burger. Nathan Rourke, as hot as he was in his press conference yesterday, he was hotter on the field against the Stampeders. And both Vernon Adams and PJ Walker out. Vernon Adams reportedly into the concussion protocol. PJ Walker out for the season. Calgary now has a QB crisis, and Winnipeg already had one, and there's never been a better example of that, maybe ever, than what happened in Ottawa with the Bombers using defense, special teams, a missed field goal return, RIP, and, of course, a ton of running, 170 plus on the ground to mitigate the fact that they had one completion through 3 quarters, ended up with 3 on the game, and ended up winning by 8 on what would have been bigger before Ottawa scored on the final play of the game. I mean, a bizarre all-time game, but a game that I said earlier, Bombers don't have to apologize. You know who you have out there. Find a way to win. They did it. But there's no way they can go on consistently winning like this right now. I mean, just thoughts on the QB situation in Calgary and in Winnipeg after what happened last week.
So in Calgary, I mean, I tried looking up updates. I guess he's still in protocol. And was it, and maybe you know this, maybe you don't, was it not a concussion or fear of a concussion earlier in the year? Was it a different injury? The one where he sat out remember they ended up losing, I believe, to Montreal.
I don't want to say on that. That is.
I forget. I don't want to be. I want to be careful too. So I don't. For some reason, I feel like a hidden gray matter on the fly here. So I apologize if I'm incorrect. That would be obviously an issue. We're having issues with clearly head injuries here, right? I mean, that's been an issue in this sport, and particularly that position, for quite some time. But PJ Walker's out for the year, right? They've already Bonner, I think it was they've signed. They brought Logan Bonner, I believe, that they brought in. After those 2 injuries, I mean, that to me, I mean, you have to bring a body in when PJ Walker's out for the year. That's no secret. We'll see how long Vernon Adams is out, but the couple different takeaways here, Haas, outside of the quarterback with Calgary is they're all of a sudden kind of catchable, right? Like, I mean, they're no longer, I think the Riders are sitting in a good position at first place, but the Stamps, especially if Vernon Adams is is expected to miss any more time, and PJ Walker isn't even an option. I mean, does second place kind of become up for grabs from Winnipeg or BC? Like, I mean, that didn't feel like it was possible, as early as a week or two ago, when we thought maybe Calgary would be the team that would end up taking the West. So that was obviously an interesting result. I don't think anybody had Nathan Rourke and the BC Lions putting up a 50-burger against the league's best defense on the road. So, what a performance from them. That's got to put, maybe that was the confidence still running through the veins of Nathan Rourke when he talked about the rule changes, right? He was probably still riding high from, what was his final stats? Did he not rush for 3 touchdowns and throw 2 more? Like, he had 3 touchdowns.
This was Rourke's stat line from the game on the weekend. He ended up throwing 20 of 24 for 331 yards, 2 touchdowns, and rushed 6 times for 43 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, and no interceptions.
For CFL 110ers that jumped on us with the Nathan Rourke 11-1 MOP bet after that poor start. We're back in business, people. He is very much live for that award, especially if they keep trending the way they are. Absolutely. What about the Bombers, though?
Yeah, so that's where I was going to next. I think we can kind of go like the before we get into the Bombers, just quickly. Like I think with the end results here, kind of waiting for it. Obviously, still room here, but Toronto losing that backbreaker, that like and Ottawa losing to the Bombers. Like I think we can safely say this is going to be a crossover season. Like I do think that the Bombers and the BC Lions are not in a great situation, but they do have breathing room for the first time in a couple weeks because of losses by Toronto and by Ottawa. But speaking specifically to the Bombers, Huss, I mean, this is the beauty of being able to still travel in the CFL, right? I'm so lucky and fortunate to be at the Winnipeg Free Press, the only English newspaper in the entire Canadian Football League that still travels to road games. So I was able to sit there banging on my keyboard, trying to get a hold of Steve Daniel, Eddie beside me. He's sending him emails saying, hey, what is this? Like, Chris Streveler has 1 completed pass right now for 11 yards. Like, what does this mean? Like, what is the possibilities of this? And so we end up finding a few different things. I forget, I don't want to butcher these, but I believe it was the Kenny Payne era. He definitely started the game. 0 passes, 0 attempts, 0 passing yards, and the Bombers won that game all those years ago. I think it was the lowest CFL game since 2015. I think there was a 46-yard performance. Perhaps it was in Edmonton. I don't want to pick on them. Maybe it was another team. But it was very, very odd, right? I mean, and even before that game, it's, I've often talked about personalities in games, and there's just something about the Bombers going to Ottawa. There's something about the Bombers having Chris Streveler as their quarterback. Like, something wild needs to happen. Lost in all this, and understandably so, is Chris Streveler's 3-1 this year, right? Like, he's got 3 victories for the 7-7 Bombers. So he's been in for more wins than he's been in for losses, obviously, this season. 1 loss. So, we knew it would take, when I say we, it was me and Eddie having this conversation before the game, that was just going to take an effort from the other 2 phases to pick up the slack from an offense we didn't think was going to put up a lot of points. Obviously, 3 completions, 54 passing yards is not a banner day for a passer. It was interesting to talk to Chris after the game, getting him at his stall. Like, I find, he went into his typical, because he's a great dude, man. He went into his typical, it was obviously an unorthodox game, but, they got the job done when they needed it. But then you just there's a bit of a pause, and I just go to him but how weird was that game? How odd was that? And he's like, man, if it looked weird, it certainly felt weird. He even said, he's like, at one point I was like, have I completed a pass in 2 hours? and then all of a sudden he looks up at the clock, and it's like, let's put together a drive for the win. And that's what they did. So he's not sitting there and patting his back. He was certainly crediting the other 2 phases and the impacts that they had in that game. But what a weird finish. And really, as crazy as it was for Winnipeg, and give the other two phases credit for getting the job done. We already talked about Trey Vavel's performance. Cam Allen on defense had both of Winnipeg's interceptions, a rookie. That was a big performance from him. But, looking over on the other side, Huss, like how embarrassing for Ottawa. Like how bad of a team do you need to be to lose to a club that only completed 3 passes? Had you looked at the stats line of the we often play hilarious. This game. If you looked at the stat line of Drew Brown and look at the stat line of Chris Streveler, you would have think that maybe the Bombers lost 40-0. And they end up winning that game. You got it in front of you. You read out what the numbers say.
Here are the gory details. Let's start on the Ottawa side. Drew Brown, arguably the worst 400-yard passing performance. I will say this. I mean, the 2 picks that he had were terrible. They did nothing in the red zone.
He looked unbelievable in the first
drive.
Like, I mean, just for those who didn't catch the game, he went 5 for 5 for 54 yards and a touchdown to Braylon Addison. Looked like it was going to be 50-0 for Ottawa. And then
so 33 of 45 for 406, 2 touchdowns, 1 in the last play of the game, and 2 killer interceptions. And then on the Winnipeg side of things, Chris Streveler, 3 of 8. For 54 yards, 1 pick. And I will say this. I mean, that number is even higher than it really should be. The 19-yard to Dylan Mitchell was essentially the old Mahomes, forward handoff that counts as a pass. And then the pass to Corcoran was a big one. They needed that. And to be honest, I really think, and probably would never say this, after Streveler threw that first pick, which was a bad one, and it looked very similar to some ugly ones that he had earlier, I'm not sure that Jason Hogan and Mike O'Shea said, listen, pal, you're not throwing the football until
you were asking that halfway through.
Until further notice.
They took the ball out of his hands, literally, because he did a good job running, right? And on that note, too, I mean, he did have that 36-yard run that set up his 1-yard touchdown. Like, that was taking full advantage of the Cam out.
He ran for more than he passed in the game.
Yeah, exactly. Finished
72
with
yards on the ground.
And here's the other part, Huss. I'd love to hear your take on this, because you obviously watch these games closely. Have you seen a harder 100 yards than what Brady Oliveira had to get on that game? Like, that felt like 300 yards, and it was 100 yards. It felt like he had to work for every single inch of that game.
No, for sure. And just, bringing it back to yesterday's announcement with the field goal post moving back. That game, like if the Bombers are able to get Zach Collaros back and make any noise in the playoffs at all, I think we'll look back at that game and the missed field goal by Lewis Ward as the TSN turning point of the entire season for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Because I'm sorry, if Lewis Ward makes that kick and Ottawa goes up 10-0, the Bombers are not coming back and winning that football game. I mean, it just simply does not happen. So a little bit of good fortune.
That was such a massive moment in the game. Like, I didn't think the Bombers were going to get a single point all game long, and then bang.
They got boat raced for a touchdown. They get the ball back, throw a pick. And all of a sudden, it's going to be, okay, we'll take the easy points. It's 10-0 running away. And then all of a sudden, it's tied. And
but hey, maybe Chris Streveler would have delivered a couple bullets down the middle of the end zone if those pesky uprights wouldn't have been there, though.
Hey, listen, before we go, and normally we spend a bit more time on this. We always hit the lines over at CoolBet. If you haven't played a CoolBet before, use the promo code WST for a 100% bonus up to $200 on your first deposit. And don't forget, Wednesday night, myself, Hammer, Remus, we will be all in our Winnipeg Sports Talk poker tourney. If you go to poker into tournaments, just put in WST, jump in on that. Would love to see you out there. We have a lot of fun with those. So that's Wednesday night, tomorrow, 8:00 p.m. Central Time. Anyone outside of Ontario can come and join us. Send us an X if you want more information, or check our social media channels for that. The odds are out for the week in the Canadian Football League. Let's get to it right now, Remo. I'll just use these lines that we've got as of right now. Calgary, 1.5-point favorites in Montreal. The BC Lions are 10-point home favorites over the Toronto Argonauts. The Ticats are a 1-point favorite in Winnipeg, taking on the Bombers on Saturday afternoon. And then Saskatchewan goes to Edmonton. The Riders are 4-point favorites over the Edmonton Elks. I will tell you that these lines could absolutely move over the course of the next little bit. Seeing a few things off the board, I think waiting for some clarity when it comes to quarterback position, but let's just quickly run down. I mean, Calgary in Montreal, if Vernon Adams isn't playing, this is, well, put it this way. I don't think Calgary will be favored by -1.5, and that's probably why we've got to take a little bit of time to get to it.
You got Remo working extra hard behind the scenes.
Sorry about that, Remo. I'm just going down the list from the list from the way the games
I think this
are.
one's pretty obvious, Huss, this first game. I mean, look, if the way that Montreal's playing right now with McLeod Bethel-Thompson, like they've found something, right? I mean, their wins haven't been amazing, but they've found, actually their win against Saskatchewan was quite incredible. Their last week win wasn't all that amazing. However, I do think there's an opportunity here to beat a team that's banged up in Calgary who doesn't have their starting quarterback. And so I'm taking Montreal all day long as the dog, the 1.5 dog. If Vernon Adams doesn't play. That being said, if Vernon Adams is practicing this week, I'm going running there and thinking that the Stampeders are going to rebound from a very disappointing performance last week. So
yeah, I can't disagree with you on that one.
I think that one, it's hard to give you an answer one way or the other. It's going to depend on whether Vernon Adams plays. Go find out today. If Vernon Adams is even a sniff of playing, I'm jumping all over 1.5 points. But if he's not practicing today, then I'm jumping over Montreal. Right
listen, BC is rolling right now. Nathan Rourke is on fire. They are at home. They are 10-point favorites against the Toronto Argonauts, who have plenty of quarterback issues of their own. Listen, I've been incredibly impressed with what BC's been doing. There's something about Toronto, though, that they find a way to be in these games, whether they win or lose them. I think just out of principle, I might take the 10 points with the Argos and expect that they can hang around in this game.
I'm going to take the 10 points and pray that Kelly plays. I don't know if there's any, am I missing news there? Is he still a week-to-week guy? Like, since teasing
he told
this
us he was ready and he did the
that's
comeback
what I mean.
video
Like, I was right
ago.
that he was going to be playing 2 weeks ago, so I imagine he's around the corner. Like, are we at the point now where it's even makes sense to put Chad Kelly out there? Like, I think he probably wants to get out there. Like, he wants to see, what he can do. I think the Argos want to see him, what he can do, but I'm with you. Like, I'm probably, while the BC Lions are coming off a 50-burger against Calgary and what was an impressive performance by Nathan Rourke, and maybe these new rule changes are just going to fire up the Canadian kid even more to prove that the rules work as they currently stand, and that's why he's going to win by 50 points, let alone 10. Anyways, I'll calm down on that one. I think I do think Toronto and Ryan Dinwiddie is not just going to give things away, right, or give things up. I do think they're in a, as I mentioned, I think they are out of it. I don't think they have much of a chance, but they aren't mathematically out of it until that situation comes. They're going to be trying their best. So it's an absolute must win for the Argos if we're asking them to just lose by 10 points. Given your original statement in your assessment, I do think that they do they have an odd way, an uncanny way of staying in games that they're not supposed to be in. So I'm going to take the Argos in the 10 points as well.
Ticats and Bombers here in the Peg, Princess Auto Stadium, another sellout Saturday afternoon. Hamilton right now is a -1 point favorite. It's basically a pick 'em, just juiced a little bit to the Ticats. This is going to sound like the Calgary game, but we got to find out if Zach Collaros is practicing and there's any chance of him playing. If he is, Bombers are very live. If Zach Collaros is not playing, they're not winning again this week the way they did last week. And we all know that the Hamilton's coming with a heck of a lot more going for them than the Ottawa Red Blacks are right now.
Well, here's the thing, Huss. Like, Hamilton, who we've been singing their praises this year and talking about the season of Bo Levi Mitchell, like, they're only one game ahead of Montreal as they've continued to win games, right? So it's not like they're riding to a first place in the East situation. I think they have they might have an extra game.
They're 2 up. They're 9-5 and Montreal's 7-7.
Okay, so 9-5 and 7. Sorry. So yeah, they're 2 up, but that's still not. There's still room there, right? As Montreal continues to get wins, Hamilton can't just lose games. If they fall this week, and Montreal, who we're predicting to beat over a Vernon Adams-less Calgary Stampeders team, then we're talking one game, right? So there's still some runway for Montreal to catch up to Hamilton, which in turn Hamilton needs to win these games because they can shut things down in a matter of games, right? If they win a game and Montreal loses this week, they get closer to clinching and changing the way they approach the end of the season here as far as health and rest and recovery and all those things. So I think there's plenty to play here for Hamilton. I'm not all that convinced if Zach does come back. Just because he's missed the last couple games. He has, like, are we expecting him to
I will consider the Bombers.
Yeah,
that's what
exactly. So like, that's
it's
a
non-starter if he's not in the game.
Yeah, and here's the thing: does this line not reflect that he's not playing, or does it reflect that he is playing? I think it does reflect that he is playing still. Like, I do think that. The Bombers are not as good a team. So anyways, I think even with Zach back in that seat, I think the Hamilton Tiger Cats are the better team here, right? And especially if they decide to give Zach another week. I'm not expecting, I'm sure I would definitely expect Chris Streveler to have a better performance than he had against the Red Blacks this past week, but I wouldn't be expecting him to dominate the Ticats. And we know the Ticats too, they've had those games, including last week. It wasn't all that great necessarily offensively, but we've seen this team that even when they're down in games, they can chuck the ball. They have the weapons to chuck the ball. This is Kenny Lawler coming back to Winnipeg. I do think, unfortunately for those Bomber fans out there, I think this is a Hamilton. Hamilton is favored for a reason. I think they win this one.
Last one is the Elks on life support at home, taking on the Riders, coming off a bye after getting pumped at home by the Montreal Alouettes. The Riders are 4-point favorites in this game. I'll say this, and I think I'm going to just keep on riding with the Elks. I know they lost last week. I think if I'm not mistaken, they've covered in 5 of their last 6 games. They've been very competitive. Even when they've lost, like last week, it's coming right down to the wire. And I think that they've got a lot of positive momentum, and this is not a team that's going to quit when it looks like they're probably out of it right now. I'm going to take the 4 points with Edmonton. Close game here. And as I said, I wouldn't at all be surprised if they could maybe pull off the upset. But Saskatchewan, definitely the better team based on the body of work. Going in, playing against a very desperate team. Let's get a good old-fashioned. Another nail-biter in the CFL, like most of the games the Elks have played over the last couple of months.
So I don't know, man. You don't think that the Elks have gone to Heartbreak Hotel too many times this season? Like,
they might do it again.
Do they have it in them? Like, and what? So it's 4, right? You said 4 points. Yeah. So yeah, like I do think that Edmonton's going to continue to fight. This is a home game, but Saskatchewan got embarrassed and they're coming off the bye, right? Like, so that's time to let that sink in, rest, recover. They're going to be healthy. I imagine they get some additional bodies back. Like, when was the last time we saw some of their Canadian receivers? They got to be coming close to getting in the lineup. So, I think the Riders, I think the Elks have run out of gas for close games. I do think they tried their butts off here the last little bit. And I feel like some people have considered me Elks haters. I'm not an Elks hater. I just, they've had a rough go here and they're in a rough go again. And I just don't see them rising to the occasion. I hope they do, but I do think the Riders, they're not the team that they owe it to, but after losing to Montreal the way they did and coming off that bye, I don't think they're going to want to lose to another a team who's last in their division. So
obviously we're doing this while we're live on the air, but I've just seen the games are all back online. And that Calgary-Montreal game, which was Calgary -1.5, is now Calgary +1.5.
Okay, so that's probably
3 point. So that doesn't sound good for Vernon Adams. That being said, Montreal -1.5. I think that game gets closer to 3 or 3.5.
Totally.
Once we realize that they're going to be down to a third-string quarterback. The Toronto-BC game is off the board. Hamilton, 1-point favorites over Winnipeg right now, and Saskatchewan -4. Your Grey Cup odds right now over at Coolbet. The Riders are the favorite at +265. Hamilton's +285. Montreal, expecting Davis Alexander back at some point, +425. BC and Calgary are 7-1. The Bombers, who were 20-1 last week, are 15-1 today. Toronto +2150, Edmonton 35-1, and the Ottawa Red Blacks after last week fall all the way down to 100-1. Don't forget, by the way, betting CFL at Coolbet every week. You've got one wager that you can press that little green button, get a 30% profit boost. You can only use it once a week, so govern yourselves accordingly, and would love to see you join us tomorrow night, 8 p.m., over at CoolBet for another Winnipeg Sports Talk poker tourney with myself, Hammer, Michael Remus, and many of our regulars here in the Peg. Hammer, well, certainly the longest CFL 110 episode ever. I think we have to keep it called CFL 110 moving forward, just knowing that we're the old heads that were here back in the days of the 100.
They might force change on you. We're not forcing change on you. We're not doing a damn thing. We're not changing a damn thing. You know, you come here, you're going to get exactly what you expect every week. Same hard hitting analysis, same, you know, whatever picks, all of it. We're staying 110.
Hey, we almost went 110 minutes with this show. Thanks to everyone that came out. I mean, certainly I think our biggest live episode yet of WST. Just back to the poll here to finish it up. Overall, what do you think of the CFL's upcoming rule changes? Mixed feelings, 35%. Hate them, 28%. Love them, 20%. Not sure yet, 17%. And we move forward with no clarity on all of it other than knowing that change is coming, and we'll see it over the course of the next couple seasons. Tomorrow on Winnipeg Sports Talk, Wednesday's episode, we will have CFL Commissioner Stuart Johnson on the program, so make sure to check that out. And you can join us this afternoon for more on this. Justin Dunk from 3 Down Nation's going to jump on. We'll get his takes on all of this. Thanks to everyone that joined us today for a really fun show. Appreciate Michael Remus doing a great job producing the program. And, of course, you, Hammer. And as I say, we're back to business on the field this week as the push to the playoffs continue, but something tells me this is not the last time we'll be speaking of the changes coming to the Canadian Football League here on CFL 110. Have a great one. Take it easy.
You've been listening to CFL 110. Tune in next week for more great Canadian football discussion.